The Israeli occupation of the West Bank is now officially illegal. That is according to international law, I guess, but definitely according to a ruling by the International Court of Justice. I never know what actually counts with international law. That's the point of international law. You don't know, and it is what whoever decides is something. That's what it is. Um, so yeah, this decision uh, by a panel of judges, including, of course, the head judge there, Nawaf Salam, from Lebanon, who has a history of anti-Israel statements. Unsurprisingly, because in Lebanon you don't actually, or you can't actually speak in favor of Israel, but you don't have to go out of your way to speak against. Only if you really think this is important for your career in this case. So yeah, this ruling has been made, and now, of course, there will be more demands that Israel evacuate and or forcefully remove the hundreds of thousands of Jews who live in settlements in those areas. Now, there's a lot in this. Of course, it this is, in 1993, Israel signed the Oslo Accords with the PLO, which was up until then recognized as a terrorist organization and then no longer recognized as a terrorist organization, but still continued to commit terrorist attacks. But this goes against those accords. I mean, those accords said that there will be different stages of the peace and of the land for peace, and it would be determined between the two sides. Now, what actually has happened since 1993, late 93, early 94, when Oslo started being implemented, is the Palestinians used their newfound power to come up with better, more effective ways of killing Jews. Still, Israel tried offering them whatever they could, did the disengagement from Gaza and forcefully removed its citizen from there and left militarily, and we saw what happened there. But yeah, so the Oslo Accords were terrible to begin with, but this goes against them. This outflanks them in the anti-Israeli direction compared to where the PLO, I think, still officially stands. Oddly enough, of course, they were happy with this. So yeah, I thought it would be good to have a real lawyer to talk about fake law. It's better to have a real lawyer to talk about real law, which we do as well from time to time. But in this case, yeah, I'm joined by James Valliant. Welcome to the Daily Objective, everyone. And James, your thoughts on this ruling?
Well, the ruling, of course, doesn't change the facts of which we are all aware. Anyone who really is interested in this can go check out the facts for themselves. The facts have not been changed one bit. Can you imagine the mentality of a person who would be moved, changed, or affected by the fact that the International Court of Justice made a ruling? Well, because of course that depends upon their moral standards. And we know what the moral standards of the ICJ and indeed what the UN's moral standards are. They're the moral standards of UNRWA. They're the moral standards of a bunch of anti Semitic nations out there that comprise a good deal of the UN. So, what it does is, if anyone is aware of the facts, this discredits the ICJ. They're a morally corrupt and evil institution. So, as you point out, there is no such thing as international law because there is no consensus about the morality that underlies this. The morality that underlies the ICJ's ruling is a twisted, evil morality. So it's not complaining. Let's take the language and pierce the confused conceptualization that they have here. Occupation. Israel has not been occupying Gaza for years. They were not in control. Hamas was in control. There was no such thing as occupation. They've been lobbing rockets continuously since Hamas took control more than 17 years ago. Okay, so it's bizarre. No, so what the ICJ ruling officially is Israel has no right to defend itself. It's got to suck it up for October 7th. It's got to take whatever October 7th Hamas wants to dish out on Israel, and Israel has no right to defend itself. So, translating the verbal confusion of the ICJ advisory ruling, mind you, they've still got, because it is phony baloney international law, they've still got to go to the Security Council, the General Assembly, even to get an approval of this. And it takes the Security Council to do anything about this. So, let us hope that the United States will intervene with a veto of this kind of evil thing. But when you untangle the conceptual confusion, what the ICJ ruled is that Israel is unable to defend itself and must suck it up every time an October 7th happens. You mentioned the Oslo Accords. The only thing, the Oslo Accords were corrupt in themselves, as you point out, but the only thing that gave it sort of a ledge that might even consider is that the Palestinian Authority, PLO at the time, were saying, oh yeah, if this goes through, we might recognize Israel's right to exist. Okay, but as you point out, this even violates the Oslo Accords position, which means that no, Palestinians can just attack Israel as they did on October 7th, lob rockets, lob missiles, do whatever you want, blow up buses like they've done in intifadas, killing innocent civilians, and Israel has no right to defend itself, and they don't even and the Palestinians don't even have to recognize the right of Israel, which Hamas, of course, has never even said they might do. As the Oslo Accords indicated, some Palestinians might do if that ever came to fruition. So no, the ICJ officially rules that Israel has no right to defend itself, is the way it should be translated.
Yeah. Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. Purple Pulp says, what I really want to know is how can anyone think the ruling is legit when the judge's country has a current conflict with Israel? Well, here's the thing with how, this works for unprincipled people, but also for people with principles, but bad ones, is they'll believe what fits whatever narrative they want to push through and whatever ideology they have and want to see pushed through. So by the way, this is where Israel, I keep repeating this, the reason this conflict is so easy to judge is not because Israel is perfect, but because the other side, the Palestinians, are pure evil, culturally and politically. And so in the imperfections of Israel, a part of it is also the fact that they acknowledge this court to begin with, went, to discuss whether or not they're committing a genocide when South Africa brought a claim. I mean, the fact that it's South Africa, a failed state backed by Iran, who is behind October 7th. Now Egypt has joined. Egypt is a dictatorship. The idea that this is some sort of a legitimate conversation between morally equal partners is ridiculous in and of itself. But of course, they don't see it as morally equal. They see Israel as morally inferior to all these dictatorships. And you should always ask yourself, and ask if you're gonna, you know, talk to any of the people who support this. Ask them, what does it say about you if you think that, that if you look at the Middle East, you look at, again, all these countries that abuse their own citizens in the most horrific ways. That you look at that area, which is really the worst area in the world, and the problem you find is that tiny sliver of land where rights are respected, not enough, but some rights, and that already makes it, objectively morally superior to the rest of the region. So that, I think, should be always remembered when dealing with such people. And if you understand why freedom is preferable to tyranny, then you understand why this court and all these international bodies, the UN itself, and every UN related international body is completely illegitimate and should cease to exist, or at least Western free, semi-free countries should pull out of it and pull their funding out of it.
Well, see, you put your finger right on it. Look, all this thing is a moral. Its moral legitimacy is all it's got behind it. There's no teeth to this. There's no enforcement capacity that the ICJ has on itself. It is simply the moral authority. And of course, anyone who buys into it is buying into an argument from authority. As I say, the facts haven't changed. So it is the moral authority of this alleged moral authority of this corrupt group that is the question. That's why it is so horrific that Israel even acknowledges that it is a legitimate organization worthy of responding to. That's the thing. Once Israel says we're going to make a response, they've conceded the whole case because all it was a big argument from authority in the first place. But this authority is an evil authority. It is an outright evil authority. As Ayn Rand pointed out before I was even born, as Ayn Rand pointed out, the UN is itself morally corrupt, to include dictatorships, to include the worst countries in the world. And that's exactly, I mean, even on the Security Council, you've got China and Russia, two of the most evil nations in the world. And when you've got everyone, let's look at it. All of those Muslim theocracies, all of those Muslim monarchies, all of those Muslim authoritarian states, you combine that with China and Russia and North Korea. We're talking about that's the only moral authority this UN thing has. The moral authority that makes it a dictatorship and terrorism protection racket. If anyone has any eyes in their head, this obviously discredits the ICJ. And for Israel to even give an answer is to concede the case, the moral case, from the outset, because all they've got is some kind of alleged moral authority. And anyone who would say, okay, well, now the UN has ruled, and that UN ruling has some special effect on me, they're committing, of course, the logical fallacy of buying into an argument from authority. It is unfortunate that Israel places so much emphasis to this day on the fact that they were created in part by a UN resolution, that they came into existence in the late 1940s with the assistance of the United Nations recognition. Well, for decades now, my whole life, and I've been 60 years I have 60 years, as the French would say. My entire life, the United Nations has been systematically against Israel, on principle against Israel, anti-Semitic in its rulings, anti-Israel in its rulings, anti-civilization in its rulings. If we leave it up to Russia, China, and Iran, I think we know what the outcome would be. But guess what, folks? Those countries are all part of the United Nations. Russia and China are on the Security Council. We have to belly up to the bar and say out loud, the United Nations lacks any moral legitimacy. Whatever. It is time for the Great Britain and the United States and Israel and every other civilized nation on this planet that claims to be a civilized nation on this planet to denounce the United Nations, to denounce the International Court of Justice as the morally corrupt, upside down, evil institution that it really is.
Yeah, and the United Nations is not just anti-Israel in the sense that, their position on the Middle East is they're against Israel. They're anti-Israel in that this is their main thing. Like this is, if you look at the Security Council resolutions, if you look at the General Assembly resolutions, if you look at UNRWA, which is such a massive, just leaving aside, the horrible things they do, such a massive organization with 13,000 employees. So yeah, this is their main focus is being anti-Israel. And yeah, so this is not a surprise. PC says, why are Jews considered settlers in East Jerusalem? There were always Jews there. ICJ wants Jews out. How Nazi of them. Yeah, look,
Yeah. Well, that's a really good
there's also the matter that doesn't come up much because I don't think people in Israel really want to focus on it because there's the Jews in Hebron, many of whom I think maybe all or most are like fanatical Jews, and but that they've been there for hundreds of years. Now there was a short period of time where they couldn't be there because they were kicked out, and then they came back. That now I haven't read the 30,000 words or so of this. I don't know if they're addressed there, if there is an exception for them, but there isn't an exception for East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem, by Israeli law, is a part of Israel. It has been annexed. The Arabs there can vote. So it's that's really that they're disregarding Israeli law. Somebody here mentioned that where was it? That Hamas, yeah, Leo says if I understand correctly, the ICJ looked at it and can only make decisions about Israel and not Hamas or the Gazans because Gaza is not a nation state, i.e. Hamas actions are not weighed into consideration. Yeah, but the PLO or the Palestinian Authority is considered a kind of almost state. It's recognized as a state by many countries now. It's treated as those who don't see it as a state within the international community see it as a soon-to-be state. So it tells you something about and look, Hamas did this without any PLO, Palestinian Authority cops trying to prevent them from doing this. They did this with maybe not the official support, but the inaction. If a militia in Israel formed and decided to attack Egypt, Israel would be blamed. Another point about East Jerusalem is if it is occupied territory, why is it, and this goes for the whole West Bank, why is it not, why should it not go back to Jordan? Because it was won from Jordan in the war. So, but that, of course, is not a point made here. Jordan, of course, does not want this territory back with the people who are there, but it is a question to be asked of this court if you're gonna engage with them, which I won't, although I don't think they would invite me as a witness.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's just remember what happened here. It was in the face uh, of Egyptian and Jordanian aggression and impending more aggression that caused Israel to occupy Sinai and the West Bank. Those were territories of Egypt and Jordan, as you correctly point out. And as the questioner correctly observes, East Jerusalem has always had a Jewish population, as far as I can tell. Always. I mean, you go back to the Crusades, there were Jews living in East Jerusalem. But our justification is not a historical one here. It is the fact that Israel is the only legitimate government, the only government that even attempts to enforce individual rights in the area. And frankly, the West Bank would be better off, Gaza would be better off. It's not a question of recognizing a state as legitimate either. Hamas has been the rulers of Gaza, have been the rulers of Gaza. It's whether they're Hamas is a recognized state or not, they have been in de facto control of the Gaza Strip for many years now. And similarly, most of the West Bank has been under the control of the Palestinian Authority for many years now. Whether they are recognized by Israel or the UN or the United States as a legitimate state is beside the point. They are the rulers of their territories, and we can hold them to account for how they control and rule their territories. Absolutely. The West Bank would be far better off if Israel just took it over. Just took it over. I am not saying that Palestinians should all be given, one man, one vote kind of thing. Absolutely, that would be the destruction of Israel. On the other hand, Israeli occupation and control over the West Bank would be the best thing to ever happen to the parts of the West Bank that are still under Palestinian control.
Yeah. By the way, there is, the results of the Oslo Accords are still there and still accepted by Israel. So most of the area is absolutely controlled by the Palestinians and is not, uh, like you said, it's not de facto occupied by Israel, and it should be because the fact that it's not means terrorist attacks come out of there a lot. And I guess Israel is waiting for an October 7th style attack or level of success of attack in order to actually do what needs to be done there. But as of now, this cannot be said to be an occupation. Yeah, there are settlements, and those settlements are considered a part of Israel. But yeah, I think the
No.
court
The, the
takes
conceptual
liberty.
translation, the conceptual translation that I gave at the beginning, the key code, the decoder ring here, denouncing Israeli occupation of either the West Bank or of Gaza is actually, let's translate it, Israel has no right to defend itself. These are staging grounds for rocket attacks, terrorist attacks, intifada style attacks. When you say that Israel is immorally, illegally, or whatever, quote, occupying those areas, what you are saying is that Israel has no right to exist. It has no right to defend itself from rocket attacks, intifada terrorist attacks, or atrocities like October 7th. You are in favor of October 7th and Israel not having any right to do a damn thing about it if you use that kind of language. That is the ICJ's language. And, UNRWA, more resources are devoted to UNRWA than you'll find devoted at the UN facilities in either New York City or Geneva. And this organization not only teaches the evil collectivist mystic propaganda of our jihadists, it actually participates in terrorist activities. And yet Britain is resuming, with the new Labour government, resuming the funding of UNRWA, ladies and gentlemen. Um, yeah.
Um,
Occupation, any complaints about occupation, though, I want them real clear, is an assertion Israel has no right to defend itself. It's just got to suck it up with October 7th.
So Michael says in the chat, these discussions remind me so much of how Christians used to argue over biblical differences where I grew up. You can see the premise that we have some legitimate system of law when we clearly do not. If you mean our discussions of it, I'm not sure if that's what you mean, or the very fact that the discussions exist. I don't think our discussion, we have made it very clear we don't think this is legitimate law. It is important to discuss because it does affect the decisions affect us and affect Israel's policy and affect our country's policies towards Israel and towards the Palestinians. So in that context, it's important, but no, it's not a concession. It is again, our objection is to the very existence of the court and absolutely to the fact that somebody, a Lebanese judge, and not somebody, again, not, if this was somebody who escaped Lebanon for a better life in a free country, that's one thing. This is somebody who is, he was a Lebanese official, right? And now he's a judge in an international court of justice. Like this is this is an abuse of the word justice at least at the level of the term social justice, if not worse.
Oh yeah, this is as I say. What you're looking at here is a linguistic corruption of an Orwellian newspeak kind of freedom is slavery, war is peace, kind of inversion of the language. But the effect of it, as you point out, Razi, I mean, I was scanning the headlines this morning on this. Australia urges Israel to, okay, so Australia just buys into the authority of this. Or one other headline, the ICJ confirms what the Palestinians have been saying. What? They haven't made any new factual ruling, any new factual finding, some new investigation. No, they simply believed the lies that we know have been lies that Hamas has been telling. And then using their corrupt moral perspective, they apply those lies, which they've swallowed whole, and then denounce Israel. The ICJ didn't confirm what the Palestinians have been saying all along. They were sucked into their lies, and then they use a corrupt moral code to evaluate those lies. So when you hear headlines, though, like that, Australia urges Israel to ... or ICJ confirms what the Palestinians have been saying all along. No, ladies and gentlemen, that's a total verbal corruption, and it's a total moral corruption on the face of it.
Deborah says, claiming Jews are occupying Judea or Samaria is like claiming Native Americans are occupying the reservation. So I have to really object to that statement very strongly. No, the issue of, they were there thousands of years ago and then they went to all these different places. I mean, that is never an argument. It's the case for Israel under those terms is as strong as the case for the Palestinians because they were there first, but then Jews were there before. Like who decides when the cutoff is? It's and again, none of the people that you're talking about thousands of years ago are around today to claim their own property. So the only connection is these happen to be Jews. These happen to be Jews. That is not a case for Israel. And it is not a case that with which Israel can win, because then, first of all, a court like this would be perfectly legitimate if you have different people of different countries, as long as they're the natives of that country. If this judge, you can look at his ancestry and see that they were there for thousands of years, then of course what he says is legitimate and should be part of the international conversation. Yeah, that's not the way. Israel is a rights respecting country. That's what makes it unique in that region. The Palestinians, though not a country, the country that they would like to form and the areas where they control as a country are totalitarian, and that is the case against them, not the fact that they weren't there or they were there. Who cares? what matters is the value placed on human life and on the rights of the humans to their own life.
There are no collective rights. I would urge you to read Ayn Rand's articles, Man's Rights and Collectivized Rights. And while you're at it, read her article, The Nature of Government. Rights pertain to individuals only, can only pertain to individuals. Groups, collectives, ethnicities, races have no right to territory. There was no collective right to the land by Native Americans. Let's start right there. And let's take the highest end civilization in North America when the Europeans got here, the Aztecs, engaged in human sacrifice, a horrific theocratic dictatorship. There was no legitimate government in North America. There was no legitimate government in North America when Europeans got here. And there is no collective, tribal, racial property right claim that anyone has anywhere on this globe. Property rights are individual rights or they are nothing at all. So, yeah, Israelis, when they go there voluntarily, and so much of Zionism was effectively purchasing the land, mind you, and settling it legitimately, and going out to places that were undeveloped and developing them for the first time, creating, in my view, the first legitimate property rights to certain parts of the region. All of the legitimate property rights in the region of Israel are Israeli. Full stop. Every other claim that Arab Muslims have some collective right, some collective claim to stake to that land are corruptions. They're not moral arguments. I do not have a claim to any part of Jerusalem just because my great grandparents lived there. No, no, that is not what rights are.
Um, Deborah also says, I'm going to read part of the comment, but plenty of Mizrahi Jews hold deeds to the land that Arabs now occupy, same as Jews forced out of most of their land. Um, yeah, look, and they're never going to get that back, and I don't see any international
And
court
they
saying
had
that they
legitimate
should.
claims to it, by the way. They
Yeah,
either paid money or did a contract or actually went out there and developed it themselves. That's a legitimate property claim, and those folks will never get it back. On
yeah,
American television the other night, they were playing that movie Exodus about the founding of Israel. And boy, you really get a sense of that. First, a sense of the fact, well, wait a minute here, you've got boatloads of Jewish refugees that are not able to find any home at all because of the frankly horrific way the British government was treating attempted refugees from Nazi Europe. But on the other hand, there were Zionists who had been there long, there generations. They were being displaced horrifically. We always talk about how the Palestinians were displaced. Well, what about Jewish Zionists who were displaced in the area, who actually had the most legitimate rights, property rights claims in the
yeah,
area?
yeah,
Yes, yes,
and
yes, yes, yes.
Clementine says, but Jews do need Israel for protection, and yeah, that is a relevant point here. So yeah, the Jews were kicked out of Arab countries, were kicked out of Europe or worse, and then escaped Europe when they could, and that's why Israel exists and is necessary. By the way, none of these people were kicked out or slaughtered because they started a war. Whereas the so-called Palestinian refugees are people who decided to take part in a war that was started against the Jewish state on the day after it declared its independence because a Jewish state was unacceptable to these people and lost. And so they have absolutely no legitimate claim to anything that I don't know how many of them are still alive, but they're obviously their children and grandchildren forever will be considered refugees under the way the UN defines Palestinian refugee as opposed to just refugee.
Oh yeah, they define Palestinian refugees as people who've been living for generations in countries, perfectly as native-born citizens of those countries are in the third, fourth, fifth generation Palestinian quote refugees, despite their normal definitions of these things. But every time you hear someone say Jews go back to Poland, can you imagine in Great Britain today if someone said to the East Indian population, Hindus need to go back to India? Now, on the face of it, everyone in Great Britain would hear that as the ugly, racist crap that it is. And it's particularly offensive in the case of go back to Poland, because that's where so many of the concentration camps were. And even before the concentration camps, where the Warsaw ghettos were. Jews did not have a particularly good time in Poland. Okay? What you're saying is go back to the land of Holocaust. Go back to the land of ghettos where the Christian majority has been oppressing you for centuries. No, the the migration of peaceful, civilized people is a good thing, and opposing it on racial grounds is a racist thing, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, and by the way, I think it was in one of the statements by the Houthis after the attack that they said, you know, you should evacuate now to a safe space back in Poland, something to that effect, which is ironic. Yeah, as PC says, Mizrahi Jews did not live in Poland. They live in part in Yemen. And I don't see Yemen saying, look, you know, Israel is stolen land. It belongs to the Palestinians. So we are opening up the borders for Jews to come home. No, that is not the case. And again, this is why if you go to these types of arguments, first of all, they are racist always. Like this is always a racist argument. Go back to anywhere is racist, but it's especially racist if it's to somebody who had never been to the place you're telling them to go back to. So, but yeah, like you said, this is unique. If you said that to Indians in England, if you said that to black people in the US, like this is a thing that's said, but it's said by such a clearly defined and widely acknowledged as super racist fringe, except when it comes to Jews, where it is now a mainstream political argument.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. You know, using words like genocide. You know, it's because Israel is wealthier. It does have a higher technology than anything in the region. It does have a more developed and advanced economy, you know, and a more powerful military. Boy, they need to suck it up because we're the victims, we're the weak ones. And that's really what this is. The ICJ is all about altruism, all about the so-called victim. And what it's important for them to identify is who the victim is. And it's a collectivist matter. It's a racial matter. It is the most savage kind of barnyard mentality, as Ayn Rand would call it, when it comes to who are the victims in this altruist scheme and who are the bad guys. But, you know, the unfortunate thing is that both in Christian and Muslim civilization, Jews have been the bad guys, the evil outsiders, those greedy capitalists. And so there's a great deal of anti-Semitic heritage, both in Christian Europe and in the Muslim Middle East, that is just rank anti-Semitism, and it comes out just like this. It blooms in its ugly way, just as we see it here with the ICJ. It's racist, really. It's racist, really. The ICJ.
Yeah. Now we know that politicians usually follow the you know whatever wherever the wind is blowing. So the UK, as you mentioned, has decided to fund UNRWA again. By the way, that's going to be the topic of Monday's episode of the reality show, which will be titled "Britain's Pro-Hamas Government." Yes, we go all out with our titles, and but we will back it up. But yeah, you mentioned Australia followed this court ruling by saying by saying that Israel should evacuate the the settlements, and of course this was the point, this was the whole point, which is to get countries to put pressure on Israel. They're putting pressure on Israel not to fight the war that Hamas started, and to allow Hamas to continue to exist and basically declare victory. Now they want Israel to give another reward, again, less than a year after the most horrific slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. They want Israel to evacuate the West Bank and give another victory to the Palestinians. We know historically how these victories to the Palestinians work. They are emboldened to keep doing what they are doing. We also know historically how victory, real victory in war, works, and how real peace is achieved, which is through real victory. And when that real victory happens, when the Palestinians not only lose their ability to, at this very moment, carry out terrorist attacks, but lose their will to fight because they're at a point where, you know, death is better than anything they're going through. That is when you will actually see any potential movement towards peace. And if that doesn't work, that means the victory was not decisive enough. Final thoughts, James?
Oh, that's exactly right. This we will be fighting. We will have October 7th after October 7th. We'll have 9/11 after 9/11 until and unless Israel and America get their moral confidence together and realize that, yeah, we need to bomb hospitals, we need to bomb schools, we need to bomb mosques to break these people. Can't let them use it tactically against us either. I mean, that is really foolish, but we have to break their will. That is the only way to win a war, to overwhelm the enemy. And I don't see Israel and America fighting wars like that these days. And that's what makes me, I'm afraid I can't be sanguine about the long term prospects here. But I don't want to end on a downer. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That's where the corruption starts, Razi.
Yeah, I also don't know how to end on a positive note, but I see in the chat that PC is going to see a performance of Cinderella today in Atlanta. So maybe that's positive, although I never know whenever I go to the theater, even, especially with, classics, somehow they've made it woke or something that really makes me annoyed with what they did to the original. But yeah, I'm not going to preemptively assume that is if that's the worst that we see today, a somewhat woke performance of Cinderella will take the win, as the U.S. president would say. Thanks, James.
Yes,
Thanks,
let's try and do
everybody.
that.
Yeah, what?
Thanks, Razi. Be well. Be safe.
Thanks, everybody, for watching. We're gonna be back tomorrow with the Daily Objective and Monday with the Daily Objective and the reality show. We'll see you then.